Hello and welcome to another episode of the companion video series for the Philosopher's Map. This is not a replacement for the book. If you are intrigued or otherwise are interested, click the Amazon link down below to find my book. It is, at time of recording, under $10 USD. It's very cheap comparatively for what it offers. I will endeavor to keep it cheap. Um, should also be a link to the Imgur gallery for all the images in the book. Uh, Thank you for watching. One note though, this will probably be the last of the more explanatory side of this companion series. And I will, from here on in, whenever I add videos to this playlist and to the series, they will be more demonstrative rather than explanatory in nature. With that said, let us begin today's episode. Here's our mascot. He's a lot happier this time because this is actually going to be a somewhat simple episode. I have notes. uh, if you'll mind my coughing, I'm a bit under the weather. So, today's topic is the steel rule. Again, sorry. The steel rule, modules, manifolds, identity, an overview, and coherence. Now, right up front, I'll tell you that these two let's get a yeah, let's do this. I'll tell you right up front that these two I believe are covered thoroughly in the book, but we'll go over them in very brief at the end. Again, I'll try not to cough too much. I'll cut if I start hacking up a lung. Sorry again, folks. Um, yeah, actually, give me one moment. Okay, that might happen a couple more times while we're doing this, but you know, as much as I could just start all over again, like, you know, let's be real, I'm human. It don't really do anybody any amount of good to worry so much about stuff like that to, like over edit and all that. I think it'd do a lot of people a lot of good if we'd all stop being so self-conscious about stuff like that. Yeah. Anyway, these three, we'll put this over here. We'll actually expand the canvas. Put these two over here, way off, out of the way. Now, I actually have some rather extensive notes, uh, straight from the book, and uh, from watching the last part over again. So if you hear paper flipping or notebook noises, that's why. Now I'm going to start out with the steel rule. which in the book is pretty simple. It's that graphs must be coherent in some form or fashion. That is the most simple, basic way to put it. There must be coherence. And the reason why, philosophically, logically, is covered in the book at length. So, like with other stuff that's covered in the book at length, we're not going to hash over it too much. Today's episode may be a little bit long in the tooth, but I like to think it won't be. Uh, I don't write scripts for these. So I have notes. I don't script them word for word. So I like to think that this won't be that long. So that's the steel rule generally. And like I said, whatever, and there is other stuff to say about it, but it's all said in the book. But that's a good enough simplification that it works for our purposes here. Now, if you are an owner of the book, this is the part that is, the whole companion guide thing. I'm sorry, folks. I'm going to have to cut again. All right, after drinking a liter of water, I think I'm finally fine to continue. Anyway, as I was trying to say, the aspect of this companion video that we're actually going to go over to hopefully help with, again, acquisition and retention, like everything else in this companion series, is going to be identity and coherence. Now, I cover these extensively in the book, but as I've stated, these are more for folks who might not really get, just in case. There's folks who get the book and need a, like, because, people learn differently. Not everyone reads a book, and that's the best form of learning for them. There's folks who learn better from demonstration and from listening to someone talk about something rather than just reading it. So let's start with what is word for word in the book in the first uh, passover of what identity is, like the first scan, if you will, the introduction to identity. This is going to be in quotes because it is directly, again, from the book. This is the start of, if you have the book, this is in the start of the first presentation of identity. The the chapter should just be titled Identity. Um, the sum properties of any entity that enable specificity or discernment of its existence from other entities implies its negation explicitly and or cryptically and in potentially multiple axes. Exists. Oh, crud. Wow. I don't know how that happened. Chalk one up to Paint 3D. Yeah, anyway. Let me go ahead and type that out again. And I'll talk about what this means. Obviously, that's kind of the point, but Oh, that's how that happened. I tried to add a tab. Like, okay. Okay, wow, that's a little disappointing. I guess I have to insert a break by multiple spaces. Exists independent of cognition, the stuff that makes the stuff, or the that makes rather stuff or not stuff a sensical, intelligible statement. Okay, so what this means is, right, and we'll go into how this ties into coherence. I guess let's go ahead and get into coherence. Yeah, you can tell that I'm not exactly on top today, yeah, but we'll try to stay optimistic, right? Just gotta stay positive. Okay, so coherence again covered a lot in the book. If any of this is not if any of this doesn't really make sense from the end of someone who doesn't have the book, I recommend getting the book. This is designed to fit in with the book and what's in the book. Again, I can't stress that enough. Because I understand that some of this is going to be this is going to be a little, this is one of the videos that's going to be way more confusing for people who do not have the book. So I'm looking here at my notes, trying to, it's kind of cramped writing. Right. Not a matter of, well, hold on. The quote is actually from a passage, but not a matter of correctness, but rightness within frame. Now, what this means, these two together, right, together with context, which we covered in last video, so you could sort of call a context a topology surrounding and affecting any given object, data point, right? Now, again, if this is a little confusing, like, remember that whenever we're dealing with any topology, it must necessarily, for us to interact with it, be an object and, like, as in coupled with a representative, right? This is sort of an unsaid thing in the book, but I was and still kind of am hoping it's intuitive what I mean. So, like, the meaning behind something, as we've discussed prior, uh, like the topology, the general data point, whenever you pair it with a representative, it becomes something that you can, it becomes an object, like a thing that you can work with. Whenever I say affecting, surrounding and affecting any given object data point, uh, I want to call back to um, the baseball player example, right? Where each data point in the topology within the career of baseball player A is labeled, is associated with a representative, etc. So if it gets a little confusing, if your eyes get a little crosswise, just remember, when we're talking about contexts, just try to think of it on the level of it is the mesh, right, that is, again, giving context to the stuff in it. So the difference between a general and a particular data point is that a general data point is being examined as its own context with no relations, no attached via relations, other data points that affect how, its uh, that affects what it is doing, right? Like it is just being taken in a vacuum, the general data point, and then whenever it is within a context, it is a particular data point because it is in some way, shape, or form being affected in a particular manner, and that is, like the context and all that stuff. Again, we covered this in the last video. So what we're covering now is what it is that a context is affecting, which is identity. Now the thing here is, and we're going to go over this very briefly, is that there's a lot of philosophical stuff behind conceptual geometry. Okay? A lot of it is irrelevant to its operation directly. Some of that will be covered here, namely the difference between, and I want to make sure I get my terms right, apparent identity and innate identity. Now, apparent identity can be thought of as the identity equivalent of the particular data point. All right. Now, I'll explain what that means in a second, but hopefully you get an idea just from that before I go into it. And yeah, my ear's getting itchy. Sorry about that. I don't know why my ears get so itchy with these headphones. Honestly, I should probably make this smaller. Uh, yeah, let's tinyfy that, and then we'll just zoom in on it. Okay, that's a bit grim. That I just repasted it with. Okay. Okay, whatever. We'll roll with it. This is a cavalcade of errors, but we'll deal with it. Okay, anyway. Let's move this over. I guess we don't really have all that much room. Anyway. The other one is innate identity, which can be thought of as the identity equivalent of the general designation for data points. Now let's tinyfy all of this and stop putting everything in size 36 font. I didn't want to do that. Now let's just tinyfy all of that. Now the thing is, if we take these, let's put them over here. Alright. So just as the general data point is general in its lack of any particular affect from other Got frogs in my throat again. I'll try to power through it. Let's hope that did it for a while. From other data points via relations, the innate identity of an object or anything, really, is what its identity is at the top layer of examination, absent any comparison, operation, etc. A thing in itself. Again, just like the general data point versus the particular data point, but can encompass more than data points, objects, directly. And I'll explain that too in a minute. If I hopefully can stop, having respiratory issues. Anyway, just as the particular data point is affected and affected by the relations and data points it is connected to, or otherwise the topology it is within, its identity is what is being affected that makes it particular. So in effect, a particular data point is particular because it is being... I'm trying not to use some of the more technical phraseology from the end of the book, so because its identity in a context includes the context it is within for that instance of that data point. Basically, once something is a part of a context, the context is also in turn a part of it. In that, and I can't stress this enough, in that instance. Now, the thing here is identity, right? Identity is not just something that applies to data points. It applies to basically everything. And I can't really put it better than that. A context itself has its own identity, right? Now, you could say, like, oh, well, isn't a context of the top layer, a general data point? And you're kind of right. Yeah, that's one of the things in the book that I go over that, um, a lot of this, in a way, is perspectival. In a way, it isn't. But the thing that really matters is that whenever you're dealing with your graph and you're looking for context, uh, not context, excuse me, you're looking for coherence, like whether or not your graph is coherent, and thus, in accordance with the one rule in the book, like the one iron axiom in the book that is not mechanical, okay? It applies to the identity of whatever context your graph is. So your graph is a context, and that context must be coherent. Now, we're going to use a very simple in the book, again, I go over this a lot. So we're just going to go over this like using that example, using a picture, image, whatever you want to call it. Again, I'm kind of under the weather. But using this from my first book, The Philosopher's Goggles, showing how in right in the middle is represented the context of a literal, like this double arrow here, that is representing the literal classical logical interpretation of the phrase expect the unexpected, right? In the context of a literal classical logical reading of the phrase expect the unexpected, you see a contradictory statement, right? You cannot expect the unexpected if you are going to read it literally and in a classical logical sense. That doesn't make any sense, okay? That's a contradictory statement. I can't stress that enough. In a paraconsistent reading, where you allow for extended expressions like extended context, contextual addition to resolve that contradiction, you allow for the understanding, and this is the context in which it isn't contradictory, in which most people read it, even if they don't like articulate it this way. We all kind of understand that what expect the unexpected means isn't literally that you are anticipating something that is unanticipatable. That is, again, a contradiction. What it actually means is to anticipate something that is novel, which is a very different concept. It's not something that you can't anticipate. It is a known thing that you can prepare for things that are like for novel circumstances, right? It's not that you're directly trying to anticipate something that by its nature cannot be anticipated. It's that you are trying to expect something that uh, it's basically telling you to be in a state of readiness, not that you should literally try to plan out that you. It's like trying to say, try to plan out the unplannable. It's a contradictory statement. So that's what I mean whenever I say like within frame. These are two different contexts, one of which renders the same phrase a contradiction. The other context renders it honestly good advice. You should be ready for anything in a lot of situations in life. I mean, even when driving, you should be ready for anything. Like, you should be prepared for, especially if you live somewhere where there's like natural disasters, right? Like, I live in the southeast. I am often like, you know, aware, right, that I have bottled water and a couple of days at a minimum of like supplies in case of a hurricane or a freak, severe thunderstorm. That's an example of how it's good advice. But if you were again to read it literally, it would be terrible advice because how the heck are you supposed to manage the unmanageable, do the undoable? So that's what I mean by rightness within frame in the book. Is that we're not talking about like coherence is not something that is, and again, I use many different examples and I go over it pretty thoroughly. But this is for people again who uh, may need someone actually talking to them about it rather than just reading it. Because I can understand again, and I hope anyone watching this like understands that the point of this whole series is again, I can't stress enough that different people learn better differently, and I want anyone who buys my book to be capable of understanding what's in it, regardless of if they're more of an auditory learner or more of a visual learner or whatever. That So I hate to sound like I'm beating a dead horse. If you read the book and you got this already, um, maybe someone else needed it to be said rather than written, you know. So with that, um, yeah, uh, the thing is, to get back to identity, innate identity is not something that I'm going to be talking about uh, much at all, because this is more of a philosophical thing, right? Unless otherwise stated, I'm talking about apparent identity, including in the book. So the reason why is that apparent identity is functional and mutable. Now, what do I mean by that? In the book, that's the kind of identity that is affected by flow, that is affected by operation. That's the identity layer that. And here, let me move this out of the way. It is affected by flow, operations, context, helps to determine coherence or incoherence, uh, is affected by variable substitution, etc. Like, it's the thing that, um, it's the thing that basically, like, if we're going to be talking about how to put this, like in a graph, right? Yeah, actually, I'll need that. So in a graph, if we're talking about, and this will be my scroll wheel's a little goofy. If you're wondering why that kept happening, but if we're talking about, say, let me undo that. That's not much better, but you know, this is why I use the meta charts, by the way, so that I avoid having stuff at different lengths and different. I think you get the idea. So let's label one of them start, end. I'll use the lazy arrow just to help visualize it. I mean, I know you can get it from start and end, but just bear with me here. So a NOT gate, if you're unaware, it it's an inversion. So if you start with true, flips it false. So we start off with So if you're going to view the flow of this graph, right, and you're going to view these lines as wires, and it as a flow of information having operations done to it, like a signal that's being operated on, which, if is kind of a lot of what this is in terms of graphing and whatnot and representing information. So you don't have to assign a value to these. I usually assign red as false and blue as true, but it doesn't matter. Let's just say the value is red and it flips it blue as an inversion gate, right? It doesn't have to be false or true, it's just red and blue. Now, the identity of that signal before the NOT gate is red and after is blue, and it was affected through the gate, which has its own identity of the inverter that turned it, if you will, in quotes, blue, to reach the end as a blue signal, right? So that's kind of the identity that's kind of the apparent identity that I'm talking about whenever I say it's functional and mutable, right? This is how you can write, and don't take it too weird whenever I say this is how you can. I'm just shortening a whole bunch load of crud to just say this is how you go 1 plus 1 equals 2, right? Is that the apparent identity of each is affected by the operation to coalesce into 2. That's the idea of some of the stuff that I explained in the very back of the book regarding, uh, identation and identity operations, right? Operations of identity, those are all having to do with apparent identity. Um, and again, this isn't going to make any sense to you if you don't have the book, but whenever I say like coalescence, identation, that stuff, like this is the kind of identity I am talking about. It is the kind of identity where 1 plus 1 can be 2 as an identity operation on both units of 1 to form 2, right? That's the kind of operation that enables red to be flipped by a NOT gate into blue, okay? That's what I mean by that. That's apparent identity. Now, with that all stated, and I hope that helped at least a good measure with um, any perhaps questions or concerns or misgivings about the concept of identity and the stuff whenever I get into the identity heavy section of the book at the back in the utility third of the book, like the utility section. Now, again, this over here is stuff that I'll cover in Gestaltic reasoning more. Uh, innate identity, that's a Gestaltic reasoning thing. That's a theory book thing, which, if you don't know, The Philosopher's Goggles, my very first book, look, I'm going to be real with you. It's kind of a hard thing, I think, for anybody that isn't me to read, because I'm not sure I really wrote it with a really great amount of conveyance. It's a very dense book, and it's a very odd book. But uh, conceptual geometry is. I'm sure you can hear that in my voice. Hold on. Ah, goodness. Conceptual geometry is, and the philosopher's map in particular, is the utility side currently. It's the main, like the main and only utility, um, like structure from my theories. But that's what this is. Like this is me taking my first theory book, The Philosopher's Goggles, and operationalizing, systematizing, and figuring out how to make into, again, a utility for a utility book, what my theories and stuff are about. So whenever I say this is more of a philosophical thing, then I'll cover it in my next book, Gestaltic Reasoning, more. Um, that's exactly what I mean. Is that the book that'll be after that, the next utility book, which I plan on being an extension to a 102, if you will, to the 101 of the Philosopher's Map. That will be the next leg of me operationalizing and building on the utility side of things from my theory side of things, right? So I say all of that, and I'm sorry if I'm being a little long-winded, but I say all of that just to get to the point that innate identity is not something that will be covered. It rather is not something that was covered in the book, really, not terribly anyway, not not really in depth like functional, rather apparent identity was. Um, and it's also something that will be more of a topic, if at all, in a utility book in the next book, and that's why we're not really going into it. This is what is covered by and large in the book. It's what a lot of the book's about, with flow and all of that. Now, to get into modules and manifolds, this is covered so thoroughly in the book that whenever I made the first episode, I figured that I had more to say. In the companion series, I really don't. Um, except maybe that if you're confused, the idea is that a module uh, is itself something that begets graphs, right? And a manifold, you can have a manifold module of sorts, right? Like a module makes graphs, and a manifold is a kind of graph, as covered in the book. Now, the thing is that you can have what is essentially a module that is manifold generating, right? So, in all intents and purposes, you have a manifold module, like a module that makes manifold structures. As the definition of, and I have to say, for, again, people who don't have the book, manifold in the book has a very specific meaning. It's a very particular meaning. It's a very, manifold in conceptual geometry kind of thing, not manifold as in like the production assembly technique or whatever. Nor is it like a standard geometry kind of manifold. We're talking about something particular to conceptual geometry. But I just wanted to clear up that yes, you can have a module that begets manifolds, but and you could call that a manifold module, but the manifold itself is the graph. It's not, you know. I figured I needed to say that because I do think in the book I kind of blurred the lines on what a module is and how that how that relates to a manifold a little bit by accident. I didn't really mean to do that. I think I kind of messed up the verbiage in a couple places. But yes, to make it absolutely clear, like, again, a module is the like rule set. It's the thing that you are doing around. It's what you're layering over the steel rule for your graphs, and it can contain a lot. It can be almost entirely implicit, even. Especially if you're doing like what I'm doing right now, is I'm going through Principia Mathematica, and I plan on rendering a lot of, if not most, and potentially even all of the proofs, or whatever you call them, the logical expressions that have an asterisk next to them in conceptual geometry compliant graphs. That will all be done in what I call in what I call an implicit manner, because it's just the same stuff, but with, an implied rule set that I think is very intuitively grasped. So I don't really feel like I need to, explicitly show what the rules and stuff are for that, because it's kind of self-explanatory if you know what you're looking at. I mean, as I say in the book, though, you should, right? In 99% of cases, you should have a legend. You should have a um, like accompanying text. You should have, etc. I mean, for my equivalent for the Principia Mathematica stuff, is literally just it is a rendering, like a re-rendering of what's in Principia Mathematica. So I figure that should suffice, and I do believe it will. Um, and it is worth saying that uh, I say it in the book, but it is worth remembering that coherence is something that can be established or broken with a good or bad, uh, respectively, set of like legend, text, notation, uh, accompanying text. So you want to be careful whenever you're making a graph that that it is coherent, that it makes sense, right? That it doesn't break its own logic, that it doesn't result in contradictory or just nonsensical stuff. Again, that's the only rule: is that it must, right? If you follow this rule, you make the mascot happy. All right. So, and I think that's about it for this episode. This will be probably, as I said, the last expository episode. Um, I'm not really sure what else I could dive into that, like, in depth, that would be fleshing out anything that's in the 101 side of things. I've already delved into some things in these past couple videos that is more in fractal systems analysis territory rather than the predominant uh, focus of the philosopher's map, which is linear systems analysis. So I think that already is a little bit of a, you know, I think that's a little bit far into the more intermediate stuff that I'll be getting into whenever I eventually get around to making Glyphic Competency, the sequel to the Philosopher's Map. Anything else that I make for the series will almost certainly be demonstrative of stuff that is covered in the book or has been covered in these past few videos. I've uploaded these once a week, but I'm not sure I'll keep to that schedule now that I've got the majority, excuse me, not the majority, but the predominantly important stuff to covered and explained. So again, if you liked what you saw here, if this intrigues you, if it makes you curious in some way, my book at time of recording is only, I believe, $7.99 USD on Amazon KDP. The printed version is much more expensive because I had to put it in the 8x5x11 format, or else some of the graphs would have been unreadable. And I have the text in size 20 font because I personally hate eye strain whenever reading, and I figured, and all of my books will be written as such, that, it should be easy to read something, like physically easy to read something. I'd never want somebody having to squint at what I've typed out. I don't want to squint at what I've typed out. Um, and I know that that can run up printing costs too. Maybe I'll release like size 12 font editions in the future for cheaper on the printed side of things, obviously. Um, I'll look into that maybe at some point. If you like the videos, please like them. If you want to subscribe, please subscribe. I have a Rumble channel as a backup that I will link sometime. If I stop uploading stuff here, you should probably check that out. I use Rumble because I've had in the past I don't really make mini videos, but I have like in the past years ago tried making like short little goofy videos, and I've actually had videos disappear from like BitChute, and uh, yeah, I just feel that Rumble is a big enough platform now that it's like secure, if that makes sense. Like I don't have to worry about stuff being like lost question mark if I upload it there. So yeah, I might eventually also create a BitChute account again, like a new one for this stuff and upload this stuff there. But like I said, I've outright lost stuff from that platform years ago, admittedly, but still. So, um, yeah, no shade on them. I just had that one negative experience and I just kind of gave up the platform. But yeah, I can't really think of what else to say. I'm very busy. I'll just use, and by the way, this video is for all intents and purposes over, so thank you for watching. This is just a little bit of extra commentary, but I'm not really sure what else I'll upload in the next few weeks because I am going to be really, really, really busy with my project with Principia Mathematica Volume 1. And I plan on, once I'm done reading and graphing Principia Mathematica Volume 1, that's whenever I'm going to start work on Gestaltic Reasoning again, finally. And once I'm done with that, I will probably only take like a week or two off and then immediately head into the development of uh, the fractal systems analysis segment of conceptual geometry, which yeah, that's like a lot of stuff, and I'm going to be very, very busy doing it. If I upload anything, it'll probably be sparingly from here on out, unfortunately. I'll try to stay active on my X account and my Dreamwidth account whenever I can. Um, I might occasionally upload stuff related to gaming to my Rumble account. As odd as that sounds, that's kind of the thing that I do whenever I'm not doing this stuff. And I figure that that's like a, humanizing behind the curtain kind of thing. I mainly play Elden Ring and Souls likes, so probably be something like that. Um, but that would be Rumble only. Like that would definitely be on my Rumble gaming account. Just again to drive traffic there because I like that there's at least one company that can compete with YouTube, sorta, if that makes sense. I don't think it's healthy in any environment for there to be no competition. Like I wouldn't, like I like that I have more than one grocery store to go to, if that makes sense. I like that there's more than one place to get gas. I would like to have more than one place to upload and view videos, right? Um, anyway, with all of that said, again, thank you for watching. Um, uh, if I think of anything else that needs to be covered more in depth or rounded out, I'll obviously add on to this. But I think this was it. So, yep.